so much for being here tonight on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. How what he has done to Ronnie Jackson, I got to be honest, at a point you got to think is just almost unforgivable. To throw a guy into the middle of the lion's den without really understanding what's in the background is just amazing to me. But, not surprising given who we're talking about. Not surprising at any level whatsoever. So, again, you look at this and it is exactly what you expect it to be. Insanity right top to bottom in the White House. It just is. So, again, not surprising. But, well established. Today, the anniversary, the 5th anniversary, and this is one of these things that I don't know that anniversary is the right word. I like to think of anniversaries as positive times, as happy times, like your wedding anniversary or something along those lines. This was today, the 5th anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh that killed 1,134 garment workers. And you go, well, it's Bangladesh. They are directly part of the supply chain that clothes a good portion of this country and a good portion of the globe. And if you look at and you go back and you read about what had happened, what I see going on here in the U.S., this whole let's gut regulation. People should be able to do whatever they want. Regulation be damned. That's what brought Rana Plaza along. The whole idea that you're going to slash and burn regulation, that no one's accountable for anything, and that, hey, if you've built a building that, maybe shouldn't have been 5 stories, and then you decided, hey, you know what, we need to expand, and you add 3 more stories on top of that and put the really heavy equipment right up there on the top, and then it collapses, and you go, of course. The building probably wasn't built to withstand that kind of vibration, that kind of weight, that kind of use at 5 stories, let alone 8. And the predictable happened. 1,134 people were killed. 1,134 families lost breadwinners. 1,134 families lost mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. And, these companies, okay. And the thing is, this was a big one. 1,134 people at one time is a huge thing. And for a brief moment, there was outrage. For a brief moment, there was global anger. We were calling for, better corporate citizenship and, all of that stuff, and people to sign on to the Bangladesh Summit Accord so that, hey, we promise not to do, we promise not to have our supply chain in the most desperate places on earth. Yet that's exactly where our clothes are all made. Now, when I was a kid, they were made here. Now, let's not romanticize this. Here, they were desperate places too. They were sweatshops here as well. People were treated horribly. And you go back the 50s, the 60s, and the horror stories in the garment mills throughout the South were just, the same kind of things that are happening overseas. I would think, though, that we would want better. Not just for our citizens, but for the globe. That, we keep talking about that, we're the shining city on the hill, that we're the good country. We want to do good around the world. And yet we keep promoting desperation. We keep promoting poverty. Because look, we're told, work hard, play by the rules, get ahead. That my whole life, that's what I've heard. And yet here are these people working 14 hours a day, sun up to sun down, 6 days a week, 7 days a week, and still in poverty and falling behind. And, I equate the Bangladesh incident back in 2013, the collapse, the mass murder, if you will, because it's really what it was. It was a mass murder. It was a mass execution, if you will, of 1,134 people. And I look at this as, that moment when we back in 1911 had the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which in 2013, oddly enough, just a few months after Bangladesh happened, we were in New York City to kick off our labor history tour, and we went to the building where the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire happened. And it just happens to be part of New York University now, or New York University. And it's a science building. And the people took us through and gave us a nice tour of, this is where the building was. And this is, kind of where, what was left of the history. There, a couple of plaques laying around. But, standing on that ground and looking up at those windows in New York and thinking about what those 146 mostly young Jewish women, what was going through their mind as they were jumping out of the window and their bodies cracking the concrete as they died. And you think about, we in this country strengthened unions, gave people the opportunity to have more of a voice on the job so that, hey, at the point of contact, you stop things. And we also pursued safety legislation that said, no, you can't lock the doors. You can't do that. You can't chain the doors shut because you're afraid someone's going to steal a scrap of something. And it's the same thing in Bangladesh. Now, understand, the day before the collapse, massive cracks were happening in this building. These more than 2,000 workers that went into that building knew they were walking into a dangerous situation. They knew their lives were in peril. In fact, we had interviewed a couple of people, I think it's been 3 or 4 years, that we had actually talked to some of the people who were there. And they said, you know what, we knew we were walking into trouble. We knew this wasn't a good situation, but we had no choice whatsoever. Had no choice. There was nothing they could do about it. Because guess what? They have no power. Look, there are a million other people in that country who'd go, you know what? You won't go in and go to work today? I will. Because my kids are hungry. Because our family is desperate. And again, you come back to this and you just go, at some point, don't we as the first world nation have to be the ones going, we should never allow that kind of situation ever. Not here, not there, not anywhere. Because I would hope, and this comes back to, I know it's a lot of hoping, I would hope we're better than that. And I would hope it's more than just about who can get the cheapest clothes, and I would hope it's more about who can make the most profit, because understand what these desperate countries are doing. And this comes back to our trade policies. Our trade policies have been set up to use desperate nations as exporters to more wealthy countries. And we as consumers, we're buying the same things. We're buying the same things that we always bought, generally by the same companies that we thought used to make them, that were made right here in the U.S. The only difference, they're made somewhere else. And the profit margins are so much greater. So again, we're making the global elite wealthier and wealthier, and we're making the working class of this globe more desperate. Not just in places like Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Pakistan or Vietnam or Cambodia or any of those places, but right here at home as well. And this is why I think days like today are important to remember, and to remember our own history, that, all of these things that we're allowing to happen today in those places happened here first. And we learned, but we didn't really learn. And I keep coming back to this. The reality is, of with the Republicans and Donald Trump's regulation cutting fetish, that there isn't a regulation that they see as worth anything. We could be going back to the future. If we allow it to happen in Bangladesh, if we allow it to happen in Cambodia, we allow it to happen in Vietnam, we allow this kind of exploitation. See, we used to understand this stuff. We used to understand that an injury to one was an injury to all. We used to get that. Somehow I think we've been divorced from the reality that there are consequences. And if we let anyone suffer, anyone struggle, it pulls us all down, especially when you're talking about the fact that these multinational corporations are getting wealthier and wealthier off the backs of these corrupt governments who exploit their own people. And today is one of those days I think we have to remember it. Because, I go back to that day and I remember it. I remember this day 5 years ago and the horror of watching the videos and seeing the images and seeing the families, weeping and mourning and a country here who kind of shrugged for a second. And yet I don't think I've watched a lot of media today. I don't think I've heard anyone talk about this at all today. And I guess it's because we got more important things to do. We've got to worry about Melania's hat, because evidently the hat looks like something Beyonce would wear. Or we have to worry about Donald Trump and Macron's handshake, because that's so much more important. I guess it just comes back to our priorities and what our mainstream corporate-controlled media puts in our mind. But I'm telling you, this should be something that's trending on Twitter. This should be something that we all remember, because look, if we allow it to continue somewhere else, eventually it comes back. Because I got friends who say, manufacturing's going to come back to the U.S. in a big way. Once we get done with all of those safety standards, once they kill off the unions, once they crush every bit of progress of the 20th century and take us back to the good old days of the 19th century, where we were desperate, like those Bangladeshi women who had to go into a building they knew was going to collapse. Oh, by the way, the collapse took 90 seconds. That's how fast an 8-story building turned to rubble, crushing 1,134 people. Just thought I'd throw that out there as a reminder. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Going to take a quick break. When we come back, Lauren Fay is going to be here to give us some of her thoughts on this day, what it means, what we should be taking from it, and maybe something that we can do around it. She's the executive director of Fashion Revolution USA. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Own 90% of the wealth. 10% of people. Own 90% of the wealth. Where do you fit in? Take a look at yourself. 10% of the people. Own 90% of the wealth.
Where smart policy and sound investment matters. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1937. That was the day a truce came in the Stockton Cannery Workers' strike. It was a pivotal moment that embodied the conflicts of the 1930s labor movement. The AFL initially wrote agricultural workers off as unorganizable. They soon raced to unionize California canneries ahead of the International Longshoremen's Association's march inland to organize warehouse workers. By early April, Agricultural Workers Union 20221, representing 5 canneries, demanded higher pay, better working conditions, and a closed shop. The canners and growers refused on the basis that they had just granted a 25% raise to the workers. They then attempted to spike union support among workers, whether AFL or CIO, by arguing, quote, one was dominated by communists, the other by racketeers, so take your choice. Soon, they formed a Citizens Labor Investigating Committee to thwart the impending strike. Picket lines went up in the early hours of April 15th. Growers and canners appealed to law enforcement to do something and appealed to the public to enlist in the forcible reopening of the canneries. Dubbed the Pick Handle Army, anti-union forces joined the sheriff's department in confronting the strikers on the 23rd. There, they battled with picketers for over 3 hours in what is referred to as the Spinach Riot. Picketers confronted scabs and spinach delivery drivers and were beaten, gassed, and shot by sheriff's forces, resulting in 1 death and 58 injuries of strikers. Considered one of the worst labor battles in California's history, the state federation moved to strip the union of its charter once the truce was called. They reorganized workers as Cannery Workers Union 20676 and won sole recognition. But agricultural workers would remain unorganized for years to come.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith. That united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
We need to stand united, for undivided we shall never fall. Remember all, we need to trust in and then forever call our brothers and our sisters. And are you and I will win. You and I both know that we can rely on it. The time is prime, planets align, ain't no mistaking. For union resurrection, the anger has awakened. The sleeping giant, come on, yeah, we can do it. We need to revive, re-amp, and re-up the labor movement.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. So, as we've been talking about, today marks the 5th anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse in Bangladesh that killed 1,134 people who were just trying to support themselves, just trying to support their families. In fact, as we said, they walked into their death. They walked into that building knowing that it was about to go. They walked in knowing that their lives were in peril, and yet they didn't have a choice. They were forced into it. And I know we like to think about it. We have choices. Unfortunately, these folks, they did not. I'm here to talk about the anniversary of today's tragedy. I've asked Lauren Fay to come talk with us. She's the executive director of Fashion Revolution USA. Lauren, thanks for taking time for us.
You're more than welcome. Happy to be here.
So, I mean, this is a horrible tragedy, something that got a little bit of attention here in the U.S., not as much as I wanted to see. And in fact, every year on this date, I try to remind people that, this is our history as well. I mean, you go back to 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire happened right here. Same kind of thing is going on around the world. And sadly, we're almost oblivious to it most of the time.
Yeah, I think that actually is really part of the problem, the fact that it's not in the U.S. and we're not, it's seen as sort of other and it's a little removed. I think it allows people to forget about it or not think about it as much.
Now, you look at these conditions and am I going too far to say that these people knew they were walking into danger, that they knew that their lives were in peril? Is that too far to go?
No, I think it's accurate. I mean, there had been complaints against the factory owners, and, I think the people that felt emboldened to speak up were. But I think one of the realities in the working conditions, for garment workers abroad and, Bangladesh and in many other countries, unfortunately, there aren't strong unions and there isn't the ability for there to be objections or concerns voiced. There's a very real risk of losing your job.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about unions on this program all the time, and the more we see the attacks here in the U.S., and the more we see, the legislative attacks and corporate attacks, the more you keep going, look to our past, look to places like Bangladesh, look to places that have very weak and ineffective unions, and what you find are poverty wages and desperate working conditions.
Yep, I think that's very true.
So in looking at this, what lessons do you think were learned to this? I know in the aftermath, there were, I guess the owner of the building was arrested for adding 3 floors onto a building that wasn't even allowed to be built for 5 stories. Anything you remember from the aftermath?
Well, I think the very real visual of the collapse and that tragedy definitely sent reverberations internationally through consumers. So I think it did stir a stronger movement for ethical production and, people being curious about where their materials are sourced. And one of the, tenets of our movement, what Fashion Revolution is pushing for, is to get people to think about that, think about who made their clothes, think about the story of these workers, and to remember that no fashion is worth the death of anyone. Fashion should be fun and it can be beautiful and it should be certainly should not be at the expense of anyone's life.
Yeah, I remember a lot of groups sprung up, and I was thinking about the Students Against Sweatshop movement. That they'd been around for a while, but front and center at the time were these kids saying, "Look, we shouldn't be allowing these sweatshops to exist anywhere, not here, not there, not anywhere." And whenever these milestones or these anniversaries pop up, again, I keep asking the question, do you know where your clothes are made? And I always find it funny that people wearing the American flag on the front of their shirt don't realize that it wasn't even made in the U.S.
Sure. Right. And it's also important to remember made in the U.S. is not always a catch-all. It doesn't translate to fair working conditions necessarily. There certainly are labor violations and issues in, California and New York. I don't think it's necessarily as rampant as abroad, but I think the pace at which fashion has really excelled and how quickly people are demanding things, which is aided by the shopping experience with online and e-commerce. People want things instantly, and that pace is really not sustainable in terms of a production standpoint. Everybody wanting new now is hard to deliver, and it's usually delivered at a cost to someone, and a very real cost in some cases.
Yeah, new now and dirt cheap, and you can't sustain an economy on that, and because look, I mean, you can't keep. There's only so much exploitable labor in this world, and it seems like we're hopefully getting to the end of it, to where we start talking about how we have sustainable economies, where people work a reasonable amount of hours, not 14 hours a day, 6-7 days a week, where we all move forward together. But, again, the capitalist model just doesn't seem to want to let us do that.
No, and it's interesting. I don't know that the capitalist model is really sustainable, because what it demands is always just new capital. And the trend, the trade-off for that is that you need to produce, we have a limited amount of resources. So you can't have unlimited capital with limited resources. That equation doesn't work. No,
it doesn't. And you can't have a system where all of the wealth goes upward. Some of it has to remain with the working class. And I look at, places like Bangladesh where this tragedy happened. Even today, you're talking about poverty wages for doing the kind of work that creates massive amounts of wealth for these huge multinational corporations.
Yes, it's true. And, one of the tenets of fashion revolution is not to name and shame, but that is, if you look at the evolution or the beginning of fast fashion, the fast fashion industry and what it's done in bringing all the money into a couple of companies' hands has caused a lot of these issues.
Yeah, but public shaming seems to be the only thing that works. This idea that there's a benevolent corporation out there who's willing to do the right thing without there being pressure from below. It doesn't seem to me, sitting here, doesn't seem to be something that's possible. Maybe you've got a different thought.
I think there's some great organizations doing work on the ground. The International Labor Rights Foundation is doing great work to really suss out what corporations are at fault and whether they're, really, if they just have policies that are just on paper and not necessarily being enforced. That work definitely needs to be done. And I think, the challenge really is with these huge companies is that they're effectively small countries. They have so much money that they're wielding, really, as sort of a weapon in a way. So it's a lot to go up against. But I think, I find there's a lot of power in everybody's everyday purchase, because if everybody starts, you can be the ripple effect in your friends and family. You get people to start thinking about this. You be the person who keeps bringing it up every year, keeps spreading the message, keeps saying it's still an issue. That we have to be hopeful that can make a very real difference.
No, I'm right there with you. And if you want to change the world, as I say all the time, start by changing your little piece of it. Yep. The thing that gets me, though, is you look at these tragedies and you look back at them, and here we're now 5 years removed from this, and you go, what did we learn? What's changed? And I go back and I read the history of the 1911 Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, and a lot of things we learned, a lot of things that legislatively happened to make sure that these things didn't happen again. We push for safety laws and all of this stuff. Did this happen in Bangladesh, or has it just been kind of we need to quell the protests and slow down the public shaming, if you will, without actually making the workers' lives better? I'm curious if you know.
Well, I would say from what I know, I think it's an issue in more than just Bangladesh. I think
Sure.
What might have happened with the Accord, Bangladesh Accord, Fire and Safety Accord, were that we had a lot of corporations sign up for that, and they're actually looking to extend that because that ends this year. So the International Labor Rights Foundation is working towards that. But that was unique in that the companies themselves were taking accountability, which is one of the things that they can sort of hide behind, the accountability of all of these brokers that make the production chain so opaque. So they were being pushed to being more accountable. But I think it's not enough change has happened in the last 5 years, I would say. I think there's definitely so much more to be done. And I think what happened with a lot of the worst manufacturing is it's been shifted to other countries like Cambodia and Burma. So
in places where people are even more desperate and sadly in situations maybe similar at some point down the road because, well, we don't seem to have the international legal framework to protect these workers.
Yes, it's a challenge with the international framework, and then also to be working with the government on the ground if they don't have the infrastructure in place to enforce it. The Accord basically was helping them to enforce some of this, but there's still a lot of work to be done from what I've heard.
It's one of those things. Let's talk about your group for a second, because like I said, we've seen a number of groups pop up over the years who try to want to do good work and make sure that the floor is raised to protect these folks. Tell me, what is Fashion Revolution USA?
So Fashion Revolution USA is the U.S. arm of the international movement and NGO Fashion Revolution, which was started 5 years ago in London by two women, Carrie Summers and Ursula de Castro, and it's a movement that's pushing for transparency in the industry. So that's the first major tenet of Fashion Revolution, and it's asking people to ask the question, who made my clothes? So it's basically trying to involve people on an individual level to take accountability for their purchases and to ask their brands, who made my clothes, which is pushing for the brands to share their more information about their factories.
Are you surprised at how many people don't know where what they're wearing or where it was made, or don't seem to have any real concern? Are you surprised by that?
Yes, I think it's something that, with fast fashion and with the low price of everything, people are disconnected from their purchases. They really don't have the buy-in, frankly, that they used to have. So there's not the emotional connection to the clothing. There's not the cherishing of the clothing, and there really is, again, this sort of waste cycle that we're in, where there's a discard and there's a huge textile waste issue as a result as well.
That's an excellent point. I mean, the idea of being somewhat connected to your clothes is kind of interesting to me. As a union guy, I look for American-made, union-made stuff. Wherever I can find it, that's what we go for. So I have a connection to finding and seeking this stuff out. So I guess it's one of those things that are a little more important to me than probably to others. So how do we bring that awareness around? How do we get people to be crazy like I am?
I don't think you're crazy. I think you've got, that's how everyone should be thinking. We should be looking out for each other, and looking out for the people who have the weakest voice. I think, to go back to your question about what Fashion Revolution is, it's really it's a movement that's pushing for systemic change in the industry. So it's saying by you engaging with, one of the easiest ways to engage is via social media, to ask your brands, who made my clothes, by taking a selfie and showing your label. And then the other ways that you can get involved are via our website. There's a ton of open source material there for you that anyone can access and download. So that is information about the landscape of sustainable and ethical fashion. That's more information about human labor rights internationally. That's information about how to organize a quiz night to maybe educate some of your friends and family about some of these issues, or to organize a panel, or to organize a screening about some great films like The True Cost, which give a great overview of these issues. So really, Fashion Revolution is trying to create individual activists and ignite that caring and that sort of fire in all of us, that these are not only messed up bad things, but messed up bad things that we can speak out against. And if we all speak out against together, we can stop.
There you go. Good stuff, Lauren. I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thanks, sir. Have a good night.
Good talking with you, Lauren Fay. She's the executive director at Fashion Revolution USA. Check out their website, fashionrevolutionusa.org. We'll get a link at thericksmithshow.com of how you can check that out. And as she said, lots of stuff there to take a look at. Gonna take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
And the bills are creeping through the door. 3,000 people screaming out. Where's our government? Lawsuits and arraignments. Members under company surveillance. Public divided. Either they love us or they hate us. Profit billions off our back, and it's still not enough. They should have took into account that we never give up. We'll be here one day longer. One day longer. The people's voice is stronger. We work hard for our money. We work hard for respect. Keep fighting for these rights. The generations it's next. One day longer. One day longer. The people's
Your working class radio experience, where hard work, common sense, and rational thought are a reality. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1999. A headline from the Los Angeles Times declared dock crews to halt work in support of death row inmate. Up and down the West Coast, the ports stood silent. The International Longshoremen and Warehousemen's Union had called their members off the job for a one-day strike. They did this to protest the death sentence for Mumia Abdul-Jamal. Mumia was a black activist and journalist who was on death row accused of killing a police officer in Philadelphia. Yet many peace and justice activists in the United States and beyond have questioned the evidence leading to his conviction. In October of 1998, the Pennsylvania State Supreme Court rejected an appeal from Mumia. Jack Heyman, a member of the executive board of the Longshoremen's Union in San Francisco, explained the context of his union's protest in a piece he wrote for the San Francisco Chronicle. He wrote, quote, "Labor and minorities share a common history of being victimized by the criminal justice system in this country. Both have long been aware of police repression and the unequal use of the death penalty against minorities and the poor. From the Haymarket martyrs who rallied workers for the 8-hour day to Harry Bridges, the Longshore Union leader targeted for deportation for being a red, to the Black Panther Party whose program of self-defense put it on the FBI's list. In San Francisco, longshoremen chanted, "An injury to one is an injury to all. Free Mumia Abu-Jamal." Protests against Mumia's execution took place across Europe in cities like London, Madrid, Dublin, and Amsterdam, and by unions in France, Brazil, and South Africa. After 30 years on death row, Mumia's sentence was commuted to life without parole. He is still in prison. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Where family value.
So one of my least favorite, former Congressman Mick Mulvaney of South Carolina, now the interim head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, evidently today was talking to a bunch of bankers. And just who you want talking to the bankers, the person who's supposed to be the one who oversees them. So I got to wonder how much he was paid for his little speaking gig. But the catch phrase that came out of the spiel today was basically, or the message that the bankers were to take home with them is, I'm just going to read his words directly. He said, "We had a hierarchy in my office in Congress." He said that if you are a lobbyist who never gave us money, I didn't talk to you. if you're a lobbyist who gave us money, I might talk to you. So basically what he's saying, no money, no talkie. So grease my palm, because it's itching, load it up, grease the wheel, and maybe you get what you want. And I go back to something, a friend of mine who's a former congressman said, Phil always said that, no one ever bought my vote, but if you're begging them for $20,000, you got to at least listen to what they're saying. And right there, right hand in hand, which again, this is why so important this November, we take back our Congress, we take back elected offices across this country, and we get money out of it. We get the corrosive effects of money out. We kick the bums out. We send them packing. Let them see what unemployment's like for once. And again, got to vote. I'm here to highlight some of that and share some thoughts on Mr. Mulvaney. I've asked our good friend David Yankovich to come talk with us. David, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
So are you surprised by Mulvaney's admission that, hey, if you don't give me any money, I'm not going to talk to you?
Absolutely not. Are you surprised?
No. I am surprised that they're this blatant about it. A small part of me is kind of surprised that, while they're wielding power, and while we can be inflamed even more, that they would just throw this out. It's like almost like Trump not thinking that anyone is reading his tweets, or Mulvaney thinking that anyone was listening to his speech there at the American Banking Association.
Well, the thing is they have their base, and their base gets a completely different set of news, so they don't think that their base is hearing that, and they're probably not. What their base is hearing is hospital closures and losing their jobs, and pretty soon they're going to hear about their union job going away with Janus versus AFSCME. Those are going to be the things that change the tide on everything. I always go back to this, and it makes me mad every time because it's become such a redundant phrase, but it shouldn't be. Had Obama done this, had Hillary done this, had Bill Clinton done this, they would be calling for impeachment just over that. The corruption that's happening in the White House and in the Republican Party is massive and unbelievable. And when I look at the hypocrisy of what they've done, it's unbelievable to me. And all it does is make me mad. It makes me want to fight harder to get good Democrats in for 2018.
No, I mean, and you're absolutely right. And this is where, I keep coming back to the money part of this. And I know maybe it's a bit naive, but, I still believe in a government of, for, and by we the people.
I mean, that's what it is. That's what it should be. And, instead of it's the economy stupid, the Republicans line should be it's the money stupid. It's half of them, half the, presenters on, or contributors in Fox News and all these talking heads, they don't believe the stuff that they say either, but it sells. They're able to divide. They're able to bring fame to themselves and notoriety and get attention. I guarantee that, good example, Alex Jones this week, admitted that, Sandy Hook actually happened. He's been, spewing this out for years now, that, that there's a hoax and everything else. They don't believe what they say. They are just in it to make money on their notoriety and being offensive.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this, and again, I keep coming back to this is why active, engaged, informed electorate. This is why we need to be fighting these fights, and we need to be taking back our government. It just seems that simple to me.
It is that simple, and I mean that's why we're seeing the massive numbers of protests and people voting and flipping elections and everything that's happening, because people are woken up now to what's going on. A lot of people are paying attention, millions and millions. I guarantee you that this year we're probably going to have the biggest midterm turnout we've ever had because people are paying attention.
So, in looking at what we're seeing, because, I guess it's kind of easy to be, where I'm at half the time, angry and ticked off. Where do we go going forward? We see these stories, we hear this stuff, we read every tweet, we see all of this stuff. Where's the sanity, and where do we head?
Well, that's up to us, isn't it? Where do we head? It's, we go into 2018 and we get some civility back in Congress and in the Senate, or the House and the Senate. 2020, we get the president out of there and we get somebody in who, isn't going to have us at the brink of war every day or in the brink of economic collapse or trade wars or whatever. But my fear is what happens after that. Are people going to stay as engaged? Because this is a chance for us to change the world together, to rebuild America to be something that is greater than we could even imagine. So after 2020, we have a chance to really start the rebuilding process. And are we going to get into 2022 and people stay home and they go back to the way things were, or are we going to stay engaged for the rest of our lives like we should be?
No, I'm with you. And it comes down to communicating. It comes down to talking to one another. And in this day and age, everything seems to be social media. I'm a guy who, I want to sit down with a beer across a table and have a conversation with somebody. But it seems more and more everything's on social media, and everything's this idea of shooting platitudes past one another. How do we break those barriers down? How do we use that to bring us all back together?
Well, I mean, social media is the greatest and the worst thing for democracy, right? Because on the one hand, you can spread fake news. A rumor can make its way around the planet in a second. People can be harassed and doxxed and all that. But on the other hand, representatives have a chance to reach out to their constituents in ways that they never had been able to before. If you have a member of Congress, in the House of Representatives, 714,000 people in their district, it's almost impossible to talk to every single one of them. A lot of the time, the only speaking or the only kind of connection these people will have will be to the representative on social media by asking a question, or maybe the only meeting they'll be able to get would be through a digital form. It's a way for us to have our leaders maybe start doing things like Skype and things like that, where you can have a virtual meeting. There's a lot of really good things that are coming out of this, but it all comes down to just like anything. How do we use it? Do we want to use it for good, where we can be a better democracy for it, or do we want to use it for bad and spread fake news about everybody and destroy everybody every time? It's really up to the people.
You're absolutely right. The other part of this, and it's something that I've been talking about for a while. This idea of everybody being verified. Of maybe if everybody is who they are, instead of being able to hide behind a jelly bean or hide behind a fake name. There's part of me that goes, maybe that's the way forward, so that we're no longer having some feeling of being anonymous.
I'm torn on that, because on one hand, you have people who can hide behind a fake name and harass the crap out of somebody, or you have the other hand where someone's working a job where they maybe can't say the things that they need to say. So I mean, there are a lot of people out there who want to remain anonymous because of the harassment, the death threats that you get when you're a public figure, or when you're somebody who is verified, or somebody who it's easy to look up. So I mean, again, this is coming down to how we use this platform. Are we going to use it for good, or are we going to use it for bad? I can tell you that right now the laws are about 20 years behind the technology. So law enforcement on chasing down people who are using this for bad is nearly impossible, because it's so far behind. The laws are, you have the state requirements, state grounds, and everything. And when you have a global media, how do you police that? And your way may be the best way to do it, but then again, everybody has a right to anonymous free speech at the same time as they should, be civil and respect others.
Do we have the right to anonymous free speech?
I think we do. I mean, it's in the Constitution. You have the right to freedom of expression.
Yeah, but that's only between you and your government. I have the right to express myself to my government. I don't have the right to come into your house or into your neighborhood and tell you what I want to say, and you have to listen. That's not what free speech. And I think we, as a country, had better come up to the reality that that's not what free speach is.
Well,
constitutionally, I have the right to free speech between me and my government, not me and you.
Well, the thing is if you say I don't like David Yankovich at all, you have a right to say that. You have a right to say that anonymous. If you are going to say things that are untrue, or that are defamatory or something like that, no, I don't think you do. But it depends on the manner of the free speech. But the laws have to catch up to that as well. But I do think that it is critical in a time, especially like now, when you have a president and a government that's doing the things they do, that there are avenues for people to anonymously, put their words out, so that they can express what's going on and whistleblow and do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I just think there's got to be some way that
there has to be. I mean, I totally agree that we have to find a middle ground here, and right now there is none.
Yeah, because I hear stories of people just being constantly harassed and stalked online, and there's almost no recourse whatsoever for the average person who like I get trolls all the time. I get stuff from people all the time. And look, I do this for a living, so I expect it. And I've got thick enough skin that I can take it. But I look at kids, for instance. I look at my teenager. The kind of cyberbullying that goes on, the kind of stuff that happens. It's just, there's part of me that goes, there's got to be a way to fix that.
Well, when you get into cyber stalking and bullying and harassment, that is when your right to anonymous free speech is not there any longer, or where it shouldn't be there any longer. Of course, the laws as they currently are, it's nearly impossible to prosecute those types of people. So the laws have to get stronger. We need a national law that that Congress needs to pass to make this easier for law enforcement to chase down. But that's where it has to end. Like, that's where your free speech ends. When you start harassing, bullying, cyber stalking. I mean, there's Republicans out there right now that they post online, make a liberal kill himself or kill herself. Stalk them and bullying them, and we'll have less of them to deal with. So I mean, that kind of speech, yeah. I mean, we absolutely have to crack down on that.
I'm with you. And I guess congratulations is in order on your end. I understand you've been given a kind of an award as one of the top digital guys in the area. Yeah,
no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
And all because of the fantastic work you did during the Jones campaign, and really you guys did a remarkable job, and good on you.
I appreciate that, but Alabama has a long way to go still. I mean, they have a lot of work that they have to get done. There's a big race going up here in 2018 for the governor's race. There's a Supreme Court race. There's tons of state rep and state senate races that are going on down there. So the work isn't done. I'm not really a part of that right now, but I mean, I got to feel like I owe it to help them. It's going to be a big one, and if we can turn Alabama blue this year again, 2 elections in a row, and then we go into 2020, we might be able to get the electoral votes off of that and really shock the country.
And that's the hope. I mean, I keep coming back to this November is either when we turn the corner and we come back to sanity, or we continue down the path of craziness.
I mean, it's a choice, and if we don't make the right choice in November, it's going to be dire. It's not going to be something we can come back with 5-10 years from now. I mean, everything will change even worse than it is now, and I keep telling people that, like, if you think it's bad now, give the Republicans another 2 years. They're just getting started, and they're counting on it. You can see their actions; they're blatantly being corrupt. They do not fear the blue wave at all. They don't think that it exists. So I challenge everybody out there that's listening to show them. Show up, vote, register all your friends and family. Let's break some records.
Show up and vote. What are you expecting tonight in Arizona?
I'm not too sure yet. I'm kind of out of the loop a little bit, but I'm going to stay optimistic.
No, I mean, I look at what's going on in Arizona as, you look at the education fight. And last night we talked to a teacher from Arizona who, talked about, just the deplorable conditions under which teachers in that state have to labor. And there, there's a whole back and forth over whether Arizona is the worst, paying state in the country, or if they're, they're 5th worst or whatever. And I'm going, still, they're at the bottom. Does it matter if they're absolute bottom or 3rd from the bottom or 4th from the bottom? When you see the pictures coming out of these school districts, and you see the textbooks that don't even have 9/11 in them yet, there's something wrong there. And to me, this is where the state, you got to look at who's been in power the last, decade, the last 2 decades, and hold somebody accountable for the situation that your schools are in.
Yeah, you got to say though that this special election that's happening, the Republicans greatly outnumber the Democrats first, and second, I mean, we've had a lot of really big wins lately with Connor Lamb, of course, in your neighborhood there, and then Doug in Alabama. I don't know how this is going to go for the Democrats tonight, but for us, I mean, we're challenging them in the strongest areas possible and making them spend money, making them fight hard. Normally, we would just roll over. So just off the bat, I'm excited for Democrats just because we're showing up to the fight. I mean, it's like that expression that you always have, the friend holds your jacket.
Yeah, I want the Democrats to stand next to me in a street fight. I don't want them to offer to hold my coat.
Yeah,
and that's what we need.
And that's what we're doing every election. I mean, every single one since Donald Trump's become president, we've showed up and we've been in the fight. Districts where we're 40-point underdogs, we've closed the gap. Sometimes we win, sometimes we lose. More times often this year we've won. but we're showing up. I'm just excited that our party is doing that. We're that strong again, where we're showing up. Like, no district is safe for the Republicans. And even this special election, you know, they're going to be close, and they're worried about it. And they should be, because, you know, we're in a fist fight.
Let me ask you this, because, you know, I get this all the time, and I get beat up a lot for it. Because, look, I'm cognizant of the reality that we live in a two-party system. The idea of starting a third party or having a Labor Party, while intellectually I would love to entertain the idea, the reality is I just don't think it's possible in this day and age. So when I say that I want the Democrats to take control back, I also want them to be good Democrats, people that I want to support, and I think we need to be pushing for that. But do you get this a lot too, that, you know, you're in the tank for the Democratic Party? I'm not necessarily in the tank for them. I'm in the tank for people who are going to do good things, who are going to move us forward, who believe in good governance and believe in democracy, and not this kind of kleptocracy and authoritarian rule.
Well, I'm in a tank for America, not for any political party. I kind of, I'll take this back to George Washington, who said that the destruction of our country will be the two-party system. You know, I, of course, am a Democrat, and I fight for the Democrats, but the thing is, you know, if you have a candidate or a nominee who is absolutely atrocious, like Roy Moore was in Alabama, you know, I mean, you have to go what's best for the country, not what's best for party. And that's what we keep preaching to the Republicans, too. I mean, you know, we're telling them, like, be better, you know, go for country, stay, you know, not for party. And, you know, I mean, I'm with you, Rick. I mean, I do get that a lot, though. And what I tell everybody is you have to go for the country first.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. You know, at the end of it, that's actually a much better response than I give. Good for you. Good for you.
I learned from the best.
There you go. I wish you guys the best. Keep up the fight, and keep up the great work that you do, David.
All right. Thank you so much, Rick.
Appreciate the time. Our good friend David Yankovich. Again, you got a nice award. He deserves it. Couldn't happen to a nicer guy. I'm going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
From United Nations headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. The Prime Minister of Armenia, Serge Sargsyan, abruptly resigned on Monday, ceding power amid mass protests calling for his removal from office. Formerly Armenia's president, Sargsyan spent years gradually accumulating power and changing the country's governance structure. Richard Giragoshian directs the Regional Studies Center, an independent think tank in Armenia.
He was able to shepherd through a series of constitutional amendments that actually transformed the country from a presidential to a parliamentary form of government.
Conveniently, it was none other than Sargsyan himself who was appointed to lead that parliamentary government. Anahit Shirinyan is an Academy Associate at Chatham House, based in Armenia.
This attempt to continue the rule of the incumbents by changing constitutions is a very popular move among the incumbents in the post-Soviet space.
Sargsyan formally took over the post of Prime Minister last week, but was met with widespread protests started by opposition parties and joined by civic groups from around the country. Then, today, a crucial army unit defected and joined those protests. Hours later, Sargsyan announced his resignation.
This was the rare exception of a peaceful, non-violent degree of people power actually achieving its goals.
Though Sargsyan is gone, Shirinyan says the hard work of rebuilding Armenia's democratic foundation remains. Nevertheless, she thinks the example set by Armenia's recent street protests could have broader implications.
Perhaps in the future, the success of these peaceful protests might be inspiring for some other countries in the post-Soviet space who are struggling in this transition period, being stuck in between democracy and the autocracy.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Your proud defender of the working class majority, Rick Smith.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Some interesting little tidbits from Michigan. Evidently today, the Michigan's Elections Bureau said that there are enough signatures that have been turned in for ballot initiatives in the state. And I don't know how I feel about ballot initiatives. I like the idea of direct democracy. I like the idea of going to the polls and having policy say. But I also see that in states, like Michigan and other places where the moneyed interests keep throwing up these ideological things that you constantly have to beat back with sanity. And it turns into a money race. And what we see in Michigan is evidently, according to their elections bureau or the board of state canvassers, they evidently are going to have enough votes or enough signatures to get legalized marijuana for recreational use on the ballot, and also a repeal of the state's baby bacon prevailing wage law. And this is, again, another one of those wet dream items on the no rights at work agenda by the wealth class. Because, hey, we should be able to pay poverty wages to construction workers. And, you go back and you learn the history of prevailing wage. And I know the right wing, it's discriminatory. They don't want people coming in and competing. And, this whole idiotic idea of, we're going to have a free market and we're going to bring in cheap labor, which is what happened in New York. Understand, they were bringing in people specifically to undercut the price of labor. And the whole idea of prevailing wage is to have a local construction industry, is to have local craftsmen doing local work, and their kids going to the schools that they build, them themselves driving over the roads that they build and the bridges that they build, and also having the money circulate back through the economy. And this has been one of those issues that in state after state, here in Pennsylvania, there's a think tank dedicated to doing nothing but repealing the prevailing wage law here. And every legislative session, there's another attack. Every legislative session, there's more legislation to go after and chip away at having a solid construction industry. And it's going to be interesting to see, again, what happens in Michigan, because it's turned into kind of a crazy state, because it's turned into a kind of a really poor state. And what the wealth class does masterfully, divide and conquer. They do an amazing job of dividing people and pitting them against one another, which is why I think, at least I hope, that the people of Michigan push back on it. And again, you need to have people out going to the polls. You need to have people voting. To me, it is that simple. Anyway, I'm hoping there's some bit of sanity there as well. Just one of those things. Anyway, if you missed any of the first hour of today's program, you can go to thericksmithshow.com and download the podcast. You can get the Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around.
Controversial, thought-provoking, opinionated. Rick Smith.
The Koch brothers believe that their great wealth entitles them to rule over the many. So, for decades, they've been running a surreptitious assault on the rules that protect the majority of us from their abuse. From whacking our voting rights to busting unions, their plutocratic intent is nothing less than to pull a coup on democracy, installing a government of, by, and for the super-rich. They've enlisted a secretive cadre of other billionaires who share their extreme kleptocratic belief that 1, property rights of the rich are more important than the people's political rights. 2, that majority rule is not a good form of governing. And 3, that the makers, as the billionaires dub themselves, should be able to overrule collective actions of the lower classes, whom they call takers. They've created a complex, sophisticated web of right-wing front groups that have already corporatized a slew of our most basic laws and institutions. And they've gained a chokehold on nearly every level of government, including our courts and whole states like Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Texas. To carry out their attacks, they've essentially taken over the Republican Party. Even more shocking than the arrogance of this unprecedented power grab by the conspiracy of billionaires is its quiet success. The Koch coup crept up on us because it abhorred publicity and couched each move as an independent effort by a separate group. Then, the conspirators backed the Supreme Court's outrageous 2010 Citizens United decision, decreeing that unlimited corporate spending is allowed because it's, quote, free speech. Only then did Americans begin waking up to the reality that the Kochs were making an assault on democracy itself. This is Jim Hightower saying, to learn more, check out the extensive Koch web files at the Center for Media and Democracy at exposedbycmd.org/Koch.
Hightower's commentaries are brought to you by the Hightower Lowdown, the monthly newsletter with Hightower's take on what Wall Street and Washington are up to. For information, visit hightowerlowdown.org.
Well, all eyes on Arizona. Yes, indeed. Arizona, ground zero right now. Who's going to fill Trent Franks' congressional seat opened up by a, and this is one of the more bizarre kind of stories, evidently offered an aide multiple times, kind of harassed her into being a surrogate mother, offered her something like $5 million, which I guess is a lot of money. I don't know that I would want to go through pregnancy for $5 million, but there might be some. There might be some. But, you know, he's out, so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Now, the woman that the Republican that's running, this Debbie Lesko, I can only go cuckoo crazy. I mean, you look at, she's a Trump wannabe. If you could just paint her a little oranger, she would be like Trump's twin sister. Got the crazy hair and all. And here to share some of his thoughts on this race, I've asked Scott Dworkin to come talk with us. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, how you doing, Rick?
Good. So what are we seeing tonight?
I don't know yet. We see an increase of in the votes. About 72,000 more people voted in this election rather than the primary, which is expected to have an increase. So, you know, I think it looks really good right now because the age gap, it seems like young people showed up today. I don't know how close it'll be. My guess is, and this is just an estimate, and I've been working constantly for like a week on this, so give me a second on the numbers. But I would say 3 or 4 points would be the worst showing that she would have. We would lose by 3 or 4. And there's a chance that we eke one out. But again, I just want to, you know, keep expectations low because that's a win for us. If we even come within 5, then we swung the district by 16 points at that time. I mean, so I want to make sure that everybody's clear that that's a win. If we come close, that's a win. It's a gigantic win.
I would argue in this district, Scott, you know, just having a competitive race given the history of the district. And look, I mean, you're talking about Arizona. So just to have someone fighting in that race, and as you've said, being close and competitive, that's a huge win.
Yeah, and that's it. It's not normal for us to be able to have that, especially special election after special election, because you know we've done this for. We started with Quist, and then we worked on Ossoff's race, and we were still fine-tuning how we can do things, especially online, to campaign, and then really knocked it out of the park with Doug Jones, and there were a lot of people involved with that effort, obviously. But that was a gigantic push, and we're glad that we pushed so hard. And then we did the same thing on more of a local level for a congressional district for Lamb's race. And then we brought that now over to Arizona's 8th congressional district. So, each of those candidates, we've been able to make them trend internationally at least the day before the race and then leading up to it. So day of, at least people will see, well, who's Harrell? Like, who is this person? Or why is No Lesko? Why is that trending? Who is that person? Right. And so it gets awareness out there, and also reminds people that it's a special election that flips the seat potentially from red to blue. So there's just a lot of things that are really great about this, because it was run so smoothly compared to the campaigns that we've had before, not just internally, but from the outside groups and spending. So it's just we're starting to get our motors so that we're all synced up and we're ready to go for the fall here.
Is this a referendum on Trump, do you think? This election? I mean, given the fact that she really is Trump in a dress.
Yeah, it's a combination of a referendum on Trump and then also the inactivity of Congress itself. But it definitely, I'd say it's mostly to check Trump's power and his corruption and investigate things that are being abused at the moment. I think that's the biggest thing that I've talked to, the people I've talked to in Arizona for the most part, and then also in Pennsylvania, Alabama. It was sort of the same messaging of, I don't really care what he has to say about anything at this point, because he's not accountable for anything. And they're not going to change, and that's not going to change, and that bothers people. That bothers people a lot. It also bothers people that they passed that tax scam. It also bothers people that they try to take our health care more than twice. And, they never protected dreamers. It proved that they just wanted to deport them.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And at some point, all of those paper cuts have got to get people really riled up. But I look at her, and I spent a little bit of time today watching some of her videos, and and she really is the embodiment of Trump. I mean, just it looks like, and I've never seen her before, but
right.
even her language. We're going to use the best technology, and it's the simplistic words and the simplistic messaging, and it could have come right out of Trump's mouth.
Illegal immigrants are invading the United States of America, and she had images of people jumping over fences and the boots hitting the dirt. And we saw that a lot in 2006. We haven't seen it as much since like 2014, but we really saw that heavy in 2006. And to see it come back again in this is kind of scary, because what she's trying to do is act like there's such a need for the wall because it's a war zone. She literally called the southern border a war zone. I mean, that means that she's never been or seen a war zone before, I would assume, because most of it's desolate. It's not like there are tons of people flowing through the southern border. If I was worried about one thing about this country, I'd be worried about our ports, our port security. I'd be worried about how people can get in via the waterways. And by the way, I want to keep in mind for everybody, if someone wants to get in this country and they're well-funded, they're going to get in this country. You know what I mean? So this whole like backdoor guy that's going to come in undercover and all this jazz, I just don't, it's another myth of like the guy with the gun who's going to retaliate by shooting the guy in the head who's the shooter. I mean, it's just another myth. So I just want to make sure that I think we're in a good spot though.
No, I agree with you. And, back to the point that you made about, worrying about people coming through the ports. And you're absolutely right. I mean, most people here who are in an undocumented fashion are just people who came on visas and overstayed. Right.
And there's a lot of different things that, we could really fix in this country, like our schools and giving kids books and school security. I'd say that that's more important. We have to protect ourselves from our own people because everybody's armed. Yeah. And these maniacs who keep on getting armed, and it's insane. And it's a public health hazard now. It's something that should be treated as if it's the flu.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. I want to come back to it. But you brought up education in Arizona. Just last night we talked to a teacher from Arizona with the Red for Ed campaign, And they talk about the deplorable conditions, the meager, the poverty pay. To me, this has got to be one of those things that this election that has to play into this.
Yeah, it's tough because somebody like Debbie is a big Betsy DeVos supporter overall, and it's hard to watch people like that act like what they would call school choice, where it just kind of gives privilege one to another, and then they kind of slide in a few minimal people to try and make it diverse. I mean, it just the things that they're doing. These are debates we had and they lost decades ago. These are things that didn't work, that have failed mostly everywhere. And what they're talking about that has been successful, they don't even want to do. So it's everything that they want to do. They want to roll things backwards because they're so stubborn and so unprofessional, undiplomatic, and reasonable as human beings that they don't want to just progress.
It's amazing. No, you're right. It's amazing. Let me ask you a last line of questioning, because I want to talk about the South Carolina shooting, the Waffle House shooting. Should the father go to prison?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he helped arm his kid. He got the gun back. I think that people who are linked to these shootings, some of them need to be held accountable. It's a really tough line because at what point are you a victim, and what point are you part of it? And with this, it seems like he shouldn't have had a gun, and the fact that he gave it to him again, it seems like he maybe not a long time, but I mean, a lot of people died.
Yeah. No, I'm of the mindset, no, you lock this guy up. We need to start making examples of people. I know you have the right to bear arms, and we've interpreted that in a very different way than I agree with, but it's also a privilege that if you use it improperly, that you should be held accountable. Sorry, you drop a gun in the middle of a restaurant and it shoots somebody, you should go to jail. There's no such thing as an accidental discharge, in my view, ever. Sorry, I just don't ever. That's where I'm at.
Right. No, and it's sad to think now in this day and age that that we have some superhero out there that's going to be armed. I can tell you most of the superheroes I know don't use firearms, or if they do, then they're going to be in a war zone. But most of them use like fire hoses or books in schools. I mean, those are the real heroes, and we're stuck in this make-believe land where people want to believe that there's going to be some kind of person who comes and saves you. The reality is, when you stare down the barrel of a gun and there are bullets flying everywhere and blood flying everywhere, pieces of people's brains, muscles and skin, and again, like pools of blood everywhere. It not only is this killing people, it's basically killing some of the victims because they never recover from it.
Yeah.
And so it's just a negative route, and the only answer that I've seen that makes any sense is these guys have ruined it for the rest of the people who enjoy these assault rifles, and that's it. I think, at what point, I think one was enough, and now it's more than that. I think we're done with assault rifles. They're too advanced. It's not what the founders intended, and I think that's been proven in court as well.
I'm with you. No, as one person pointed out, the AR-15 seems to be the common denominator in all of these shootings, and also white male.
Right. Well, white male is I've been trying to use the term white male terrorist because it is what it is. Our biggest threat right now is, and I'm not trying to typecast parties or anything like that with this, but most of them are right-wing nut jobs that have mental issues, obviously.
Yep.
But unless you can predict the future, unless you can expect what someone's going to do with that gun, or if they're going to ever have a mental collapse, if they're ever going to have a mental break and just break down and come into work. Like, you're never going to be able to expect it, because the one time it happens is when they murder people.
Exactly. As I say, they're all law-abiding, legal gun owners until they're not. Right. Scott, I appreciate the time. Good stuff. Thanks for giving us your thoughts on Arizona tonight.
Yeah, thanks. And sorry I'm so tired. It's been,
get some rest.
Long hours running elections. Yeah.
Get some rest. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Good stuff. Our good friend Scott Dworkin. Let's take a quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Smith Show. The most important issues of the day. This is the Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. Poor Ronnie Jackson. I got to tell you, I feel for him. I feel for the guy. This is what happens when you've got an idiot president who does no vetting whatsoever, and they just throw people out with the assumption that nobody's got a past that they're going to have to worry about. You got to wonder if Ronnie Jackson was even consulted before Trump threw his name out there. I mean, I don't know, but you got to wonder. Because I'll tell you right now, if Donald Trump called me today and said, we're going to put you up for something, no thanks. I don't want to go through that kind of scrutiny. Just no thanks at all. Anyway, let's find out what's going on around the world in Washington, D.C. Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Luke, thanks for taking time for us.
You're very welcome.
So what do you think? Do you think Trump at all consulted him, or do you think he just threw his name out there?
I don't know, but his inability to either defend him or withdraw his nomination just totally confirms this notion that Trump really doesn't care about your long-term well-being. I mean, he's leaving this guy to make up his own decision, but basically pulling out the rug from underneath him at the same time. Commit to one thing or the other, but he seems to want to have it both ways.
Exactly. I mean, in some of the stories I've heard about this Ronnie Jackson, which, look, all I've seen him do is a couple of bad press conferences. I don't know anything about his past. Maybe it's all false and it's all allegation that he's a guy who likes to bend the elbow a little bit and a little loose with the prescription pad. But maybe these are things you should have thought of before you threw your name into the ring.
I would also say, if indeed this wasn't really Jackson's decision to seek this post, I'd be a little pissed at Trump because you basically took away your steady gig.
Yep.
And now, under the close microscope of a big promotion, you've lost that, I think, and you're not going to get the thing you were aiming for. So, yeah, he doesn't seem to be having a much upward trajectory in the employment world these days.
And he'll be bending the elbow a little bit more if that's the case, and that's a sad thing. Let's move on. Today, the French president in town. How'd that go?
Well, a few things that we were really looking for. Emmanuel Macron, the French president, and Donald Trump have a decent rapport, and it was Macron inviting Trump to France last year for the Bastille Day celebrations and military parades that planted the idea in Trump's mind that tanks should be rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue. So I think in that respect, Macron is viewed favorably in Trump's eyes, and if that weren't the case, then the policy differences between these two guys would be all the more glaring. And I think they are pretty glaring. I mean, in some ways, you looked at this press conference today, these guys are kind of hamming it up. President Trump leans in for the kiss. Everyone's laughing, sort of mocking the French, affect, but in a very lighthearted way. Masks the fact that I don't think these guys are converging on common ground from a policy standpoint. The thing everyone's been watching are, I'd say, primarily the future of the Iranian nuclear deal. President Trump has to decide by May 12th whether or not he reimposes sanctions on Iran. Doing so would basically kill that deal. And listen to Macron, he basically says, yeah, we talked about this for an hour. We've agreed we're going to pursue another deal. We're going to kind of leave the nuclear deal where it is, just narrowly dealing with a certain spectrum of issues, and then we're going to have this other deal. We're going to start negotiating it now over the course of months. We'll bring in more countries, and we're going to talk about missiles. We're going to talk about constraining Iran's behavior in various countries around the Middle East, in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon and Yemen. And we're also going to throw in some longer-term horizon dates for when, Iran would be able to one day maybe renew its nuclear activity. And so that's like kind of a pie-in-the-sky deal, but Macron presents it as if it's something he and Trump have agreed on. And I think the headlines started writing themselves at that point, except in the ensuing 45 minutes, Trump says absolutely nothing, which suggests he's on board with this. In fact, his primary, statements on Iran are, hey, wait and see what I'm going to do on the 12th, continuing this model of turning consequential foreign policy decisions that had, tremendous impact on the rest of the world into reality show style stunts. And then sort of saying, Iran, if you threaten us, we're going to come bang you up. I mean, my interpretation of this is not that Trump has come around to Macron's thinking on the Iran deal, but that Macron, realizing that so many other countries' hopes rest on him to be able to change Trump's minds, that he's just trying to change the ground underneath Trump's feet, basically, to say, hey, we're going to get a better deal. Stick with the deal. And, Trump wakes up tomorrow and says, oh, I guess I've got to stick with the nuclear deal, and we're working on a better deal. And I don't have any confidence that with Macron out of the country for the next 2 weeks and John Bolton whispering over Trump's shoulder, that's going to stick. And
right.
So I think it's a lot of wishful thinking to believe that Macron somehow convinced Trump to rethink this.
No, you got to give him credit for giving it the old college try. I mean, at some point, something's got to try and help because like you said, I'm really beginning to freak out because you've got no sane voices whatsoever, and from what I keep hearing, you got Trump who's not even listening to Kelly anymore. It's all Bolton all the time. New fresh toy.
Yeah, the funny part about this is when you try to see, so Trump's resolve to, I think, implode the Iranian nuclear deal is pretty well established. That was clear for a long time. He's just not going to find a way to pinch his nose and accept President Obama's foreign policy success as
right.
something he can stomach anymore. But yeah, and so he's sort of talking the talk on getting rid of the Iran deal.
No, I like the Macron. I like the Macron direction. Hey, we're going to try something different. We're going to keep what we've got until we can get something better, and then you can put your name on it, and you'll forget about the other guy.
No, it's absolutely the right approach, and
sure.
It's probably the only thing that could work. I guess I just find it funny when you watch Trump try and justify another kind of seemingly contrary decision, at least from the typical American foreign policy playbook, which is get the troops out of Syria right away, where you realize Trump doesn't understand how all the pieces fit together, because he says, he goes through this thing, he gets a question, I think from, one of the American reporters, sort of, oh, what's your latest thinking on the Syria pullout? And President Trump's thinking on this has been quite muddled so far. I mean, he's driven by, I think, an impulse that a lot of us, can understand. I think a lot of folks on the political left are cheering on, which is, hey, we can't just be stuck in wars in the Middle East forever. We have to have narrower objectives. We've got to seek congressional approval, and when we don't have it, we should just, sort of retreat back to our core interests and bring our troops home. And Trump sort of starts off by saying that, I'd love to get out. Let's bring our incredible warriors back home. We've done a favor to the region by fighting ISIS. Now we need to get out. But we don't want to give the keys to Iran and Syria. We need to be in Syria to prevent Iran from paving a way all the way to the Mediterranean, which is clearly Bolton's sort of warning, echoing in Trump's mind. But then he comes back to, we got to bring them home relatively soon. And but then we don't want Iran to have a lasting footprint. I mean, he just keeps ping-ponging back and forth between these things, and you realize he doesn't really have a final decision to make on Syria.
The decider guy, he is not.
No, and I can understand that. I mean, he certainly, in many ways, I think his impulse is to do what he wants to do here, and what he really does believe has been an error of American thinking over the past 18 years, which is this adventurism in the Middle East, his desire. He wants to be able to declare mission accomplished, to say, I ended the war against ISIS, Obama didn't, look at me, it's so great. But at the same time, doing that flatly contradicts this sort of narrative of absolute panic over Iran's sphere of influence. And so I think he's going to find that a very tough call to make.
Yeah, and throw on top of that, him wanting that Nobel Peace Prize.
Exactly.
Bob Ney was on the program last night, and he said, if everything goes well with North Korea, and the North and the South start talking, and they end their nuclear program, and everything's write it on the calendar, Trump wins Nobel Peace Prize.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, and this is one of those, if we were talking on the radio 20 years ago, I could say this and no one could look it up and they just have to take it at face value. But I believe the South Korean president got the Nobel Peace Prize for convening talks with Kim Jong-un's father in 2000. And so there is sort of a precedent of, if not the Nobel Peace Prize, international sort of global renown being showered on whoever can make the next best attempt at resolving the North Korea crisis. So Bob Ney might not be all that. He might be onto something there. If North Korea and the U.S. can put something on paper, it would be a major contribution to international security of the likes that the Nobel Prize Committee would typically reward someone for. But maybe they are just not going to do it for Trump. They'll do it for Obama prematurely, but not reward Trump for that.
Or he'll be right on the cover of Time again, so another porn star can spank him with the magazine. It is what it is. So let me ask you this, because I've been hearing a lot about China and Russia with the Iran deal. Why is China and Russia involved in this?
Well, they're signatories. I mean, I think many people forget that the Iran nuclear deal was the P5 plus one, so it's the permanent 5 members of the Security Council plus Germany, and the P5 from the Security Council are not just our allies in Europe, France and the United Kingdom, but are Russia and China as well. And then I think that actually is important to stress, because it illustrates this sort of absurd argument that Trump has been making, that we need to completely rip open the Iranian nuclear deal because we want to do it. Well, you don't just have to. You could probably convince the French and the Brits to do that just because they care a lot about what President Trump is doing. But you're not going to get Russia and China to come along with this. Russia in particular is a close ally of the Iranians. They don't want to tighten the screws on Tehran. And so Russia and China are taking a very different approach. They're trying to use sort of peer pressure at the United Nations to get countries to sign on to a resolution enshrining the nuclear deal, saying, we support this, and so should you, President Trump, because it's important for national security reasons. I mean, I think there's not a chance this is ever going to work on President Trump. If his good buddies like Macron can't win him over, he's not going to be won over by, a bunch of African and Latin American countries putting their names on paper saying they don't like what he's doing. And in many cases, this approach, which might have worked in another administration, within the White House, it's America first. And, actually you can gauge how well you're doing in your America first strategy by how many countries are squealing about your strategy. So I don't think this approach is going to work. But the one argument Russia is making that I think is really important is, we're trying to convince North Korea that it's worth going into a long-term agreement with the United States where they're going to offer you, some sort of concession in exchange for you giving up your nuclear weapons. We shouldn't be tearing up the biggest, foremost, nuclear deal, international nuclear agreement on the books. In the same month, you're trying to convince Kim Jong-un that you're a trusted partner. So I think that argument is pretty worthwhile to listen to. But again, Trump is, I don't think, a president that's going to be very receptive to this peer pressure.
No, because look, at the end of it, he'll make a deal, and 6 weeks later, maybe he tweets out the complete opposite idea, and we, who knows? I mean, who knows where this is going? Let's move along. The EPA, Scott Pruitt back in the news again, huh?
Oh yeah, he has declared that burning wood for biofuel is carbon neutral, which puts it on par with solar and wind energy in the EPA's eyes, which is completely at odds with the EPA's own scientific consensus. Their sort of science panel is still deliberating on this, but he thought it was so important that he rush out and declare biomass burning carbon neutral without the science to back it up.
Yeah, and where does that come from? I mean, did you just reach around back and pop something out, or is there some think tank that dreamt this up? The Heartland Institute, maybe? Anybody?
Yeah, I'm sure there's some pseudoscience which shows this. I mean, look, I mean, the argument here from the EPA is, yes, carbon is you do emit a lot of carbon when you burn trees. We chop them up into wood blocks and use them for bioenergy. But all of that's absorbed back when you plant a tree and it grows up. And in a perfect world, that does work. The problem is you start tinkering with this. There's so many ways this can go wrong. One is you don't allow a tree to grow back to, a healthy height before you cut it down again and then burn it, so it's not absorbing. One is the climate change actually prevents forests of the future from growing back the way they always did. You're actually never going to get this perfect cycle. And the other one is you almost never burn the biomass right where you're creating it. So you're going to be putting these wood chips on a truck or something and sending them around the world, which you actually see a lot in the biomass industry. And all the associated shipping emissions totally offset this. So I think this is really a way of, pandering to special interests within the forestry and logging communities. But again, leave it to Scott Pruitt to frame this. He says this is about conservation. This is good stewardship of the environment to be able to, promote a carbon neutral energy source like this. So only in America is burning wood on par with solar and wind energy when it comes to being carbon neutral.
With this administration, though, nothing surprises me. So this, unfortunately, sadly, not a surprise.
The Twitter personality Matthew Chapman at Waffle Fan tweeted out, "Wood burning is carbon neutral in the same way that a $50 a night condo in Washington, D.C. is market value." And to that man, I say, touche.
Yeah, we've had Matthew on the program a couple of times. Good guy. Yeah. Good stuff. And he's right. I mean, he's spot on. Jeez. Crazy times. But hey, this is the Trump administration. It is what it is. Luke, I appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Let's do it.
Good stuff. Luke Vargas, Talk Media News. Quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
What do you believe would be the repercussions for Democrats if they end up losing in the recall election?
I think honestly, there aren't going to be any repercussions.
We ain't voting no more prima donnas. You want to call the National Guard? Let's get it poppin'. What happens in Wisconsin don't stay in Wisconsin. Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. President.
Ah, yes, there's a blast from the past. So what do you think, Ding Dong Debbie? You think what happens in Wisconsin is going to happen to do anything across the country? No problem at all. And I got to be honest with you, I go back to that moment. I go back to 2011, 2012, 2011 when we were sleeping on the marble floor in the Capitol there in Wisconsin, waiting for Democrats on the national level to actually do something, waiting for President Obama to put those comfortable shoes on and start marching with us in the February cold. And then to have the head of the DNC go, it's only in Wisconsin. Don't worry about it. From that moment forward, I wanted Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, not just out of the DNC, but out of the party entirely. And finally, this year, the hope is that someone sends her packing. That's why I've asked Tim Canova to come talk with us. He's an independent candidate for Florida's 23rd Congressional District. Yes, that is Debbie Wasserman-Schultz district. Tim, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you, Rick. It's great to be with you.
So, I go back to that moment. And again, we have, years of failed leadership, years of missteps, years of policy positions that have harmed working people. And yet there she still is, representative of the 23rd there in Florida.
I think it was a pivotal moment. That goes well beyond Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, of course. I think the failure of the National Democrats and of President Obama to take a strong position in Wisconsin and to push back hard, it came to hurt them all over this country.
And it wasn't just the Democrats, and it wasn't just her, to be honest. There were a lot of labor leaders here in Pennsylvania I came back to and said, hey, fire alert. I'm pulling the fire alarm because this stuff's coming, only to be told, no, you're being hyperbolic.
Exactly, and they took the view that it's their fight, not our fight, it's their fight. And, they forgot that the basis of labor strength is solidarity. It's understanding that when working folks are under attack somewhere, they're going to be under attack everywhere.
And, I go back to those moments. And for me, that was really, I mean, you can go back to, points throughout our history. Go back to 71 with the Powell Memo, 73, the Heritage Foundation being founded and ALEC being founded. You can go back to Reagan firing the Patco workers. You can go through all of the history of the downfall of the working class of this country. But to me, the most recent one was the failure in February of 2011 for Democrats all the way down, president all the way down, to address what was right in front of us.
Yeah. Well, and I would trace it even a little bit earlier. Of course, by 2011, the Republicans already had taken control of the House. President Obama had an opportunity in 2009 and 2010 to really step up in a big way, help working people in this country. And he surrounded himself with a lot of Wall Street folks like Larry Summers and Timothy Geithner. And I think it came to hurt the Democrats tremendously at the polls in that midterm election of 2010.
No, I agree with you. And the moment I knew we were in for a very long haul is twofold. One, the hiring of Rahm Emanuel as his chief of staff, and two, pursuing Lilly Ledbetter instead of something better than the Employee Free Choice Act. From that moment forward, I knew it was trouble.
Yeah, the Employee Free Choice Act was one of the first of the campaign promises that they really walked away from.
They just walk. They ran, which is why I think guys like you are so important to get into these positions where we need people who are going to be fighting for working folks. Because to me, and people like to bring up AFCA or the Employee Free Choice Act as it is, as what we wanted. No, that was what we thought George W. Bush would sign. I wanted something better than that, like a repeal of Taft-Hartley or something much better. And yet what we got was nothing. And what we're looking at is, well, the end of public sector unions as we know it, with a Supreme Court justice, a stolen seat that's going to give us Janus.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned repeal of Taft-Hartley. That's what we've been talking about during my campaign. We need big changes in this country, and this incremental kind of stuff, nothing's going to change when you shoot for tiny changes right now.
Yeah, I mean, we need bold thought, and this is where I want bold vision. I want people who are visionary leaders. And look, we might not get there, and it may not be this election, it may not be next, but at least have the ideas that this is where we want to go. This is where we want to take the country, and give people the hope and change that Obama promised and talked about, but actually move us in that direction.
Yes.
So how do we do that, Tim? I mean, I know elect guys like you. How do we get to that point?
Well, yeah, Rick, you're right. We're so far from that point, right? I mean, you take a look at the party that's supposed to represent the workers, the Democratic Party, in the weakest position that it's been in 98 years, since 1920, in the House, the Senate, the state legislatures. It looks bleak. It looks like the spectrum continues to shift to the right. And yet, that's looking at the glass as half empty, not half full, I guess. It's easy to look at it that way. But think about it. 2 years ago, we came close to electing Senator Bernie Sanders as president. I firmly believe had it been an honest, open primary season in the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders not only would have had the nomination, I think this country was ready to elect him president, and he would have had long coat strings, you could say, for the House and Senate.
I agree, but
I think on issue after issue, the people of this country are way more progressive than the political class. There's no doubt about that. The problem is waking folks up and keeping them woken up and keeping them mobilized and active and building. And all that good energy that came out of the woodwork in 2016 that propelled Bernie's campaign, that propelled my campaign. I ran in 2016 against Wasserman-Schultz. I ran as a Democrat. We promised we wouldn't take any corporate money. We raised $3.8 million, all entirely from individual donations, small donations, average donation size of $17. And we gave her a run for the money. After the election, and I should just say, I was a candidate for less than 8 months, and we almost beat her. After the election, we had our doubts about the final count, and we sought to verify the votes, to inspect the ballots. We put in a public records request under Florida law, and the supervisor of elections of Broward County stonewalled us, forced us to file a lawsuit. While the lawsuit was pending, the supervisor destroyed all of our paper ballots. So we haven't dropped the case. We're pushing forward on it. It just shows the level of corruption. It's all over this country. It's right here in Broward County, not surprisingly, in the Debbie Wasserman-Schultz election. And we haven't given up. This time, instead of running as a Democrat, I decided to run as an independent. The Democratic Party could not care less about the destroyed ballots, even though it violated federal law and state law and the court's orders. So let's run as an independent this time. You know, the largest party in this country now are those who don't identify with any of the parties. It's the non-party affiliation. The independent vote is now about 45% of the electorate, way ahead of either Democrats or Republicans. And among the young, millennial generation and younger, the estimates are 7 out of 10 are now independent. So we're going to be on the ballot in November. It'll be a three-way race. Voters are going to have a choice between either a corporate-funded Democrat, a corporate-funded Republican, or an independent who stands with working folks, won't take a penny from any of these corporate interests.
No,
so I do think it requires, if change is going to come, we got to start winning these important elections. And I think people recognize that. We've gotten an upsurge of donations since I announced I was running as an independent. So folks are going to timcanova.com and contributing small amounts, and it's adding up quickly.
And for me, that's what we have to go back to, the idea of we the people, active, engaged, informed, all of that, and also funding these elections. And at some point, what we have to do is we have to get the corrosive effects of money out of this. We've got to get the big donors out of this. In fact, today, just a bit ago, I was talking about Mick Mulvaney, the former congressman from South Carolina, now the head of the interim head of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, who in front of the Bankers Association said, if lobbyists gave me money, I talked to them. If they didn't give me money, we didn't talk to them. And you go, what?
That's the way it is. Let me tell you, Rick, the reason I first got involved in politics, I've been a law professor for 2 decades, and I used to work on Capitol Hill as a staffer many years ago for a couple of years. I've been a Democrat for many years, working for progressive Democrats, and I've been active on a lot of issues, whether it's Occupy Wall Street, Federal Reserve issues, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All those issues got me into this race. And it was the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. I was trying to lobby my Congresswoman's office to get her to vote against fast-tracking the TPP. I'm a tenured law professor at the only law school in her entire district, and I couldn't get the time of day, not just from her, from anyone on her staff. And this was an eye-opener from what I learned very quickly. If you got a $5,000 check from a political action committee to give to Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, you get an appointment with her staff, maybe even with her. If you're just an average Joe or Jane wanting to get a word in with your Congresswoman's office, not even to meet with her personally, but just to express your opinion and let them know how you feel about something as important as the TPP, they'd rather call the police on you when you come to protest their office than to invite you to sit down and have a conversation with them. And this is the way it is with an awful lot of incumbents. 60 Minutes did a documentary last time I was running that the average member of Congress, to pay for their re-election campaigns, are spending 30 hours a week in these call centers doing call time, dialing for dollars. And you know who they're dialing? They're not dialing people of limited means. They're dialing the CEO class, the top 1%. And you could be in politics for all the right reasons, but if you're spending 30 hours a week talking to rich people on the phone to ingratiate yourself and try to get them to give contributions, after a few months, you start thinking like that.
Yep. No, as a friend of mine who was a congressman for a couple of years said, look, nobody ever bought my vote. But if I'm talking to you and begging you for 20,000 or 5,000 or whatever it is, you've got my ear. And, eventually, you've got enough people have my ear. You start thinking like that and you become part of the establishment.
Exactly. And I got to say, first of all, how fortunate I was. You kind of make your fortune in a way. I was fortunate that I jumped into a race as a David versus Goliath, right? I went after the head of the Democratic National Committee. And the beauty of it was that she had made herself so vilified. She was hated for such good reasons for how she had rigged the primaries against Bernie Sanders and the lousy job she had been doing for Democrats for years, that I immediately got a small donor base around the country. Now, I didn't take advantage of it. I didn't get greedy and say, okay, I got small donors. Let's try to now start getting PAC money or something like that. I made a pledge from the beginning. I wouldn't take a penny from any of these corporate interests. I have never picked up the phone and dialed anyone asking for money for this campaign. We do a lot of asks, but it's usually emails that we're sending to our small donor base. And I've said many times, very proudly, that if elected, I will be bought and paid for. But I'll be bought and paid for by the American people, by the people who are making $17 contributions to me. And I won't be bought and paid for by any of these corporate interests.
Good on you.
Well, this is what this country needs, right? We need publicly financed elections. We need to overturn Citizens United. Enough of, you cannot have a democracy if you've got corporate money ruling the roost like this. And people have realized that since Teddy Roosevelt. It's very sad how far back this country has fallen now in just the past couple of decades.
No, you're absolutely right. And, the reality is as unions have lost bargaining power and have lost strength, what we've seen is 40 years of declining wages, not just stagnant wages, but declining. And also, you look at, I look at myself, I started in the freight business back in the late 80s, making, the top wage at the time was like $18.80 an hour with full health care, full pension, paid sick time, paid vacation, all of this stuff. Today, more than 30 years later, the top wage, $18 an hour, doing the same job, crummy health care, 401k, pension. And, where did all of that extra income that the working class people like me were making go? Well, it went to the top 1%. And what ended up happening is we've created the largest billionaire class in the history of civilization on the backs of a poverty working class.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. And, the problem with the Democratic Party right now, and it pains me to say this because I have loved that party. I mean, I felt an allegiance to it, I should say. I shouldn't say I loved it, but I felt an allegiance to the party of Roosevelt and Kennedy for many decades. But the problem with this party is it doesn't even know what time it is. It doesn't realize that we are now in year 10 of a Great Depression for jobs and incomes for working folks in this country. They look at the stock market, it's going fine for the most part, and the asset markets are going fine, and their own fundraising is going fine. So if you're in that little 1% bubble, it looks like it's a strong economy.
Yep.
And you start believing the unemployment rate is anywhere near accurate then. And it's not. We don't have a 4.5% unemployment rate in any meaningful way. There are millions of people who have they're discouraged workers, they've dropped out of the workforce, they've given up on looking, or they're working 2 or 3 part-time consulting jobs, but they want a job with some benefits and some vacation time and, a retirement and health insurance. And these jobs are becoming fewer and further between. And you mentioned wages, stagnant, falling. This is becoming a nightmare for much of America, and it's not even recognized. I think this is a depression. People are depressed. The suicide rate is way up. The opioid rate, overdose rate, 100 people a day are dying in this country from self-medicating. This is not a healthy society. And when you have such vast, high levels of hidden unemployment and underemployment, you're going to have an awful lot of other problems going wrong in your society.
No, certainly. And, there was a study done. It's been years since I've read it. But in the UK, they did a study that when conservative governments take over, the suicide rates go up. All of the negative things go up, like suicide and alcoholism and drug abuse and spousal abuse. All of the negatives go up because what you have is a government who works to crush and to take things away. And it's what we're living through right now.
And have been living through even before Donald Trump.
Right.
That's what's sad, is the Democrats had a great opportunity. You mentioned Rob Emanuel, right? Obama's chief of staff, his first chief of staff, and he famously said that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And then the Obama White House proceeded to waste
it, exactly.
The crisis, at least wasted it for working folks. Didn't waste it for Wall Street. They made out like bandits, the bandits that they are.
Yeah, we most certainly made sure that they were fat and happy. Let me bang out a couple of quick questions. We only got a couple minutes left. I want to get to some of your policy ideas. I'm a single payer guy, always have been. Wish Max Baucus would have allowed it to go through, at least have a discussion during the what was it, 10-month ramming down our throats of the ACA. Where are you on healthcare?
I'm Medicare for all, single payer. I have been for many years. I was exposed to single payer programs overseas in Europe, and I think that's the way to go. I think the private insurance companies are very parasitic. Their business model is to basically to extract gains in the form of shareholder wealth or CEO pay. Where's it coming from? It's coming from denying health benefits to ordinary Americans and charging them more for it. It's a terrible business model. We need single payer. I'm for a Jobs for All program, a New Deal, the kind of public works that made this country great. Give a national service program to young folks when they turn 18, give them the opportunity to work a couple of years, whether it's a civilian conservation corps or a sea conservation corps or jobs in urban areas. There's so much work to be done. And then in return, give them the tuition-free higher education afterwards, sort of like the GI Bill that my dad's generation got. And people ask, well, how are you going to pay for all of this? And I've been a professor of law and public finance for a lot of years, so I can tell you that you look at American history, how was the New Deal paid for? You had a Federal Reserve that actually worked for Main Street and not just Wall Street during the Great Depression, during the New Deal, and during World War II. We should have the Federal Reserve do much the same right now. We should have the so-called quantitative easing programs, QE programs, where the Fed was purchasing trillions of dollars of mortgage-backed securities from Wall Street banks and hedge funds to keep them afloat. They didn't do anything like that through union pension funds and trust funds. They need to have a program like that to be making loans at very low interest rates so that working folks can have their retirement savings doing well the way the hedge fund class was helped by the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, we can't do that, Tim. We can't do that because where would Sean Hannity buy up the cheap housing?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And the Fed can also be making pumping money into state infrastructure banks and to cooperatives. These are the kind of Main Street solutions that we need in this country that don't have to add to the deficit and to the debt. In fact, if you start putting unemployed resources to work building this country, they become tax-paying resources suddenly. So it pays for itself over the lifetime of the grant, so to speak. This is what the GI Bill and the Marshall Plan really proved to a different generation, a previous generation.
Yeah, we most certainly need that. Last question. What's the issue you die on?
Well, I am a Jobs for All guy. I really think that if you can solve these the problem of work, that a lot of other problems fall into place. But I also am realistic enough to know you can't just get there. The political system is broken. It's become an oligarchy. We got to get corporate money out of politics. For me, that is the issue that I would die on, because it's the issue that this campaign that I've been running has been committed to such a point where we've had some tough months. This past winter, it was like Valley Forge. You know, the public that we rely on for small donations wasn't so engaged. People are burnt out from the last race. They got fatigue, donor fatigue, small donor fatigue, I guess you could say. And I wasn't willing to blow it quits, and I wasn't willing to go looking for corporate money, that's for sure. So I do think that's one of the issues to die on. And I also think another one is election integrity. And this has been a painful lesson to learn in my own race when they destroy the paper ballots. You know, everyone talks about the way the voting machines could be hacked by foreign powers, by domestic powers, that it's so bad that all over Europe, all these democracies all over Europe have banned the electronic voting machine.
Yeah, no, I've been saying for a while, you know, the Republicans have done a masterful job of breaking our elections. But Tim, I hate to cut you off. I'd love to have you come back and share some more with us as this continues and as your race continues. Fantastic stuff. Please come back and talk to us again.
Thank you, Rick. I would love to, and I appreciate you having me on and being able to talk to your audience. Thank you so much.
Anytime. Good stuff. Tim Canova for Congress.com. You can also check out timcanova.com. We'll get links to the ricksmithshow.com. Highly suggest take a look at the website. If you got a couple of bucks, like he said, you know, small donations matter. Let's take a quick break. Right back to wrap things up. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
My friend, and the kids locked in the Capitol are fighting till the end. And we're not gonna break tonight, and we're not gonna bend. Some say the union's down, but I asked around, and everybody said, this is a union town, all down the line. This is a union town, all down the line. And if they come to strip our rights away, a union town, all down the line.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
To this battle, take my union gun. Gonna end this world of slavery, for this war is one you're bound to lose. You fascists are bound to lose.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Check out the website, thericksmithshow.com. I want to clear a little bit up. I mean, watching the chat room and some of the conversations going on there, and there's this talking point in the right wing. They regurgitate it ad nauseum. The unions kill jobs, and you go, do you really believe that, or did you really see that, or did you just hear that on fake news? What unions do is they fight for a share of the profits that corporations make. Your share. And, you know, I go back to when unions had higher density. We had 1960s, we had a 20 to 30 to 1 CEO to worker pay ratio. The other night we went through, there are some companies in this country like Mattel, their CEO makes almost 5,000 to 1 over their workforce. Most companies are around the 300 to 1 range when you look at the Fortune 500. So this idea that you know, those unions, they're greedy and they want some, you go, really? When you look at CEO pay, if a CEO had to sit down across the table from a union and say, I justify my pay at 300 times what the worker who actually creates the wealth is getting, they would be laughed out of the room. And understand, unions are about giving workers the ability to bargain for better wages, hours, conditions. That's the reality. So when I think back over the generations, when we had the most prosperous working class in the history of civilization, we had thriving businesses. Why? Because people had disposable income. They were able to spend at the local five and dime. They were able to spend money at the local malt shop, at the local restaurant, the local movie theater. They were able to buy flowers for their spouse. They were able to buy, you know, shoes for the kids, sugar for the house. They had disposable income. What's going on right now is we're in this race to the bottom. We're in this painful moment in our history where we're now looking for the cheapest price because our wages don't go as far because we're getting cheated at work. And this causes even more outsourcing of our jobs to desperate countries. So the spiraling down continues, and you get these idiots who go, unions kill jobs. And you go, where exactly did you get that? What, did you pull that out of somewhere? And I saw it. Yeah, I've seen businesses go out of business as well, but it wasn't the union's fault. It was bad management's fault. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. We're going to be back tomorrow. Thanks.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Together, we can make America better. Email rick@thericksmithshow.com or interact with us any